Hello everyone and welcome to our next Chat Physics author Q&A. We are super excited to have Ben Rogers here today, somebody who's really important for us with having the experience of physics in secondary and primary, and obviously his fantastic book that we're going through today, The Big Ideas in Physics and How to Teach Them. So welcome Ben, how are you today?
Oh, great, thank you. Yeah, really well. It's a nice day, isn't it? I'm sure no one's watching. I hope everyone's out in the garden having a nice time.
I know. Well, the benefit is that we can all watch later on if we're not watching right now. So we'll be sharing the link a little bit later on. And if anybody is enjoying the lovely weather today, please do. And then please come back later, come and see us and what we're all talking about. And hopefully this will be super useful for people who, through our Chat Physics mission, what we're trying to do is support people who are non-specialists, so people who are new to science teaching, new to physics teaching, and we also find we have a lot of people as well who are the sole physics teacher in their school. So we're really hoping that what we go through today with this book is going to help those people as well. Maybe it will lead you to get the book. Maybe it'll even let you win it today. So thank you for joining us. And first of all, Ben, I'd like to kick off by just asking you, what prompted you initially to actually write this book on the big ideas in physics?
I mean, it was quite a long time ago, and in fact, I'd already moved from secondary teaching to primary teaching at this point. I was learning a ton of stuff from primary colleagues. If you get a chance to go in, if anyone gets a chance to go in and watch primary teachers teach, especially anything to do with, actually maths and English, they're astonishingly skillful. And they use techniques that I think I certainly didn't know at secondary school. And part of the reason for wanting to write the book is because I thought it'd be really useful for my secondary colleagues to see those techniques applied to physics. I thought that would be beneficial. I mean, I've been teaching physics for 18 years and was still thinking a lot about it. When you're in the thick of it, you don't have a chance to have a proper mull over it and think about it. And I found myself sort of 18 months after leaving high school in moving to primary, really thinking about what was it that I loved about physics, because I was really enjoying primary, but you still miss I still miss a bit of physics. And then also I was working for a trust, and a new academy had been taken on by a friend of mine, and he had a science department that had no physicists, so I was supporting them, training them up, and it sort of started off as it was 3 or 4 things coming together at once. So
Yeah.
I was writing those materials for those colleagues, thinking, I mean, I'm enjoying this. Why don't I keep doing it? I was really interested. That each chapter starts with a bit of a narrative, a bit of a history, and I was really getting into. I didn't do that for the 18 years I was actually teaching physics, but as soon as I wasn't, so I couldn't get enough of how was electricity discovered? That whole story. In fact, electricity for that full 18 years had been my least favorite physics topic, and now it's my favorite. I think knowing that story and how it was discovered, and Plato, amber buttons rubbing and picking up dust, and then Colchester having a connection. Well, Colchester's sort of my neck of the woods. Reasonably close. I think, Gilbert of Colchester with his Visorium. The Visorium, which I never used in secondary. I don't know if you haven't made a Visorium, you've not lived. It's just a little diamond of tinfoil, aluminium foil, folded and then stuck on a cocktail stick so it can rotate. It's like a compass needle. And you rub your balloon or your ruler on your jumper, and it points. Anyway, I use it with year 3, 4, 5, 6 pupils now, and it works every time. It's one of those, practicals in science never work, right? This one always works.
I think that's the reputation we have in physics, isn't it? Things don't work, but
this is what it should have done.
Absolutely, and keeping it that simple, but showing these key ideas, it's fantastic for primary school students. But secondary alike, the ones that don't get to do that at primary, don't get to experience the wow factor of this simple sort of the simple laws, the simple definitions that we talk about with them, actually seeing them in action is just absolutely incredible. And and reminding people of these sort of like little things you can do in the classroom is so important. I think, like you said earlier, it's so easy when you're teaching to not really get a chance to step back and really think about what you're doing and how you want to bring it in. So like you were saying about your narrative in the book, it's just such a good way of introducing a topic. It's such a good way of saying, actually science always wasn't as it is now. We didn't understand things in these ways. Where did it come from? What was the thinking like at the time? And yeah, it's just so powerful. And I think it's absolutely fantastic the link that you've got with primary schools, and love to talk a little bit more about that shortly, definitely.
I mean, I enjoyed my 18 years of high school, but it's, your it's a long career. If you want, your mid-20s when you train, and 65 maybe if you finish, that's a long time.
Absolutely.
If anyone's interested, I'd highly recommend moving to primary.
Yeah, totally.
Just throw that out there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like there are enough high school physics teachers, so I'm not, I can imagine heads of department going, "Oh no, don't do that." But there's a real shortage of science expertise at primary.
Yeah.
Even I was always interested in primary. Sorry, I'm just going to rattle on.
No, go
Stop me.
ahead. Yeah.
I remember whenever it was 1994 when I trained, thinking, well, I really fancy primary, but someone said to me, "Oh no, don't! You've got a physics degree. Don't waste it on primary." Okay.
Oh,
I mean, outrageous, right?
yeah,
Anyway,
it is.
do both. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, I remember visiting a primary. I was really lucky to go to a fantastic primary school. I think it was in Lincoln, and just seeing what they were capable of there, seeing what they were being introduced to and how they were doing it. I mean, I didn't really get an awful lot of a look at the science, but just in general, the primary school stuff was just so inspiring. And there's this kind of there's this sort of like, I guess, concern that when students come into year 7, because they're spread between so many teachers suddenly and we don't always know them that well, sometimes it's actually really difficult to get them back into that situation where they're really driving their work pace. And I know there's a bit of a concern that coming into year 7, they almost sort of like go back a little bit because the challenge is not there anymore. Is that something that you have found or experienced? I've definitely heard it. Sorry about the noise if you can hear that. I've definitely heard it talked about recently that, students at primary are completing what looks comparatively between what they do in primary and year 7. They do so much at primary, then they come into year 7 and the challenge is almost lost a little bit. But I think there's so many factors that are contributing to that. Is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, 100%. You don't. I mean, it's very triggering. As I now see myself. I mean, I did it, so I'm not blaming anyone. But when I think of the work those kids, the teachers, but also the kids have done in Key Stage 2, well, all the way through, and then I think there's a transfer effect, isn't there? So they know this stuff, but they knew it in their primary classrooms. Now they're in secondary school. And you ask them, I see it in maths. Maths is really obvious. So you'll say to them, okay, how do you add these two fractions? I have no idea. Or, here's a pizza. Here's how much is left.
Yeah.
And they're like that. But you can look at their scores from their SATs, and they got, if they got 100 in their SATs, and sort of 70% of them did, even they got 95 or 90, they could do that. They could do that in year 4. And my daughter came home when she was in year 7, she's sixth form now, but when she came back, they're making me do it year 4 work, and it's true. So I think high school teachers, I don't know, is it some sort of psychological thing where you're thinking, I'm gonna, they never learned anything at primary school, it's up to me to fix it. Well, they did know it. They're looking at you like blankly, but you're letting them get away with it. I don't think they're lazy. I just think it's that transfer of is it right? The primary school told me that, but it might not be right anymore. Or I'm in a maths classroom now. I don't know. But you can't, if you assume they know nothing, then that's just outrageous. Geffen was talking about this in his one, wasn't he? I was listening to that, re-listening to it, and thinking, yeah, go on, Geffen, you tell him. I think it's a serious problem, and I think it's going to get worse. I think when I was a secondary teacher, the Key Stage 2 SATs still had science in it, and we knew that the kids had come in and they'd done circuits and so on. But as soon as that disappeared, I'm pretty confident that across the country, and there is evidence that backs this up, that science took a real caning in the curriculum, and it was all English and maths in the primary curriculum. And so probably you might be, some schools taught loads, some schools taught none. Whereas now I think with the new Ofsted framework, I'm really pleased about that, because primary schools will be teaching. If they know they're going to get inspected, they'll have thought through their progression model for science, and they'll be teaching it properly, even if it's not assessed. So please, well, visit your primary schools. Look at what they were able to do 6 months ago, and assume they can still do it. I mean, that's a starting point, isn't it? Check for understanding all the way, but
that's it.
Your starting point is assume they've done the national curriculum and they know it well.
Yeah,
Ran
and I
over.
think,
Sorry, that was a bit much.
No, absolutely. No, I think no, I completely hear what you're saying. I think it's so important to have these conversations. Like this is a key sort of conversation that we can have with somebody who's got that experience. And if we can share this with, people who are teaching science, teaching physics at high school or further, actually trying to join up those dots better is just so powerful in the long run. And, I think I always say to year 7 when I get them for a new class, I'm like, oh, what do we know about this? Maybe it's the wrong question to ask, but a lot of them will go, no, never heard of it, never done science before, miss. And I now have, my line is, you absolutely have done science before, but you might have just done it in different contexts, and that's okay. It's completely okay to look at things in different contexts. It's important even that we do. So it's really good having those conversations. But I think I'm certainly inspired to go and spend a little bit more time in our local primaries.
It'll change your life.
Yeah.
It'll change mine.
And theirs probably as well, if we can roll it out a bit better. So yeah. So moving on a little bit with the questions back on the book, you mentioned subject knowledge enhancement at one point, and I was wondering, so what is your experience of working with some inexperienced teachers? What sort of concerns did they have about going into physics, needing that subject knowledge enhancement? I have a few friends who did similar, and there were certain concerns that they had, but what sort of inexperienced teachers' concerns have you come across?
And I think we're talking about high school again, aren't we? So I mean, the whole book was written as part of that, as a subject knowledge enhancement for those non-specialist teachers. What concerns they had? I think physics suffers more than most subjects for this sort of perceived it's really difficult. I think partly because you can get the wrong answers, and I think that's one of the, you were talking about your kids earlier on, desperate about getting the right answer, and there is that, and I think if you're not a specialist and the kid says, the back of the book says it's 4, you can get caught out really easily, I think. So there's that, and I think I don't know if it was taught badly. Everything's taught badly in some way or another, but a lot of teachers just do not feel confident about physics, and so there's building that confidence up, which is one of the reasons I started with those stories, the sort of narrative part of it, because you can't go wrong with that. Everyone loves a story, and I think having that foundation, understanding, lets you build off it. That's the aim with those, to give you a really solid foundation that you can start building on from a position of confidence. Absolutely. And some of it's just counterintuitive. All that forces at a distance, that makes no sense. I mean, it's magic, right? Energy. It's like, okay, so what's energy? I don't know. No one knows. If you think you know, have a read around. If you don't, all of that sort of stuff. I think people like solar system because it's just like a physical model. You can visualize it, it's all right.
Absolutely,
but anything abstract, field lines, are they real? What's going on there? All of that, and I think it's hugely abstract. And if you look at a textbook, and it's sort of you lost. I'm like it when I flick through my daughter's biology A-level textbook. I have no idea what's going on, and I feel it must be like that for a non-specialist coming into physics teaching, even primary key stage 3. You're quite deep quite quickly. Charge, what's the difference between charge and current? What? All of that stuff I think is really tricky. Models,
some real abstract, some real abstract concepts. And I mean, we talk about models a lot, don't we? We're always talking, particularly in physics, but in other areas too. Modeling is so powerful, but at the same time, if it's something that's really, really difficult to model, then people kind of want to step away and get some distance from that, because it's much more difficult to explain. It's much more difficult to actually create a visualization. Almost, I talk to students all the time about, just think about it, visualize it like this. And actually, it's really tricky to do so, and nobody can see what's in your own head. So trying to get somebody else to do it in theirs, I don't know, is that the right way of doing things? Should we be building better models? So definitely understand where you're coming from. And I think that's something that I can absolutely agree that I've seen in new, inexperienced teachers, and even in really experienced biology teachers as well, who are sort of dropped into teaching year 11 in their sort of combined science area for a few topics. And the first thing they do is go, help me. Absolutely, we will. But we don't want people to feel like that. We want people to be able to step in with confidence with these key areas, key ideas. So obviously that's the aim, really, isn't it, as we go. So the next thing is actually, I was going to talk to you about the narrative element, but you've already mentioned that, which is fantastic. What I would like to do is just read a little bit briefly from the introduction, because I absolutely love the way this started. And for anybody who doesn't have the book, it'll give you guys a little bit of a flavour of what we're working in with this book as well. So at the beginning, it says, a physicist is the sum of the problems she can solve. She knows the conservation of energy, and when she can solve all of the problems associated with it, knowing all the problems lets you solve new ones. The science student, confronted with a problem, seeks to see it as like one or more of the exemplary problems he has encountered before. I would wholly agree with this, and having just moved into the sort of revision session with my own year 12s and 13s, I am repeating this over and over and over again. Do you think this is something that teachers are really buying into at the moment? And if not, why not? And if they are, do you think it's done well?
Okay. So when I started writing the book, I was starting to get really interested in cognitive science, and actually it was still quite new, I think. And I'm not even Oliver Cavaglioni's was blogging, and it was all hand drawn at that point. Before I don't know if he got his iPad at that point, but the cognitive load theory stuff that was coming out, I was reading it. It was making so much sense. All of the cognitive, I can't remember the secret. Is all, it was a half a decade ago. It's a bit blurry, but that all of the learning scientist stuff was coming out at that point, and that was really powerful. All of those big ideas, and it was all just taking off. So it's really exciting, and almost I feel Twitter was massive for that, and I'd been on Twitter a little while by that point and had a bit of a following. And I'd started blogging about it, and it was really exciting. So I've drifted away from your question, really, but it was all of that idea of reducing cognitive load, all of those ideas. That it solidified everything in my mind, and I think it's had the same effect on many secondary colleagues in the sciences. I mean, there's no great surprise. A lot of this research was done on physics in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and it's massively. It's a really good fit for. You have to stretch it a little bit if you're talking about English or other subjects, but physics and maths, it's a really powerful model. So I've definitely seen it grow and grow and grow, and I think I lucked out in picking a horse that was going to win for writing this book, and it was really exciting at that time, and I think it's going to continue to grow. I can't see how it's going to be overcome because the evidence is really strong.
Definitely.
I don't see it. Do I see it everywhere? I mean, the trouble is on Twitter, you're in a bubble, aren't you? So all the people who agree with me, or I agree with them, are on Twitter and follow it, and we're all right. And I guess those other people, there are other bubbles going, that's nonsense. I don't follow them particularly, they don't follow me. So I don't know is the answer. It's not like I get in that many. I get in the schools in my trust all the time. I love it, but I'm not in other schools very often, so I don't really know how wide it is. Although actually, I do, because the early career framework is all this stuff, isn't it?
That's true.
And the science guidance from the research review from Ofsted is really along these lines. So it is out there, isn't it? And I think if anyone doesn't know it, they're going to have to read up quite soon, because they're going to be, it's not flavour of the month. It's probably flavour of the decade, I would say.
Definitely.
That who knows what will come along next. I mean, I've been in teaching long enough to know that things do come and go, but
and cycle round,
really
don't
useful.
they cycle back round again as well, but it does feel like it's really accelerating at the moment, I mean, pun intended entirely. So it does feel like it does. It feels like it's really taking off at the moment. I think there's always going to be there's always going to be the sort of those who are a little bit unsure of it. And I think that is a valid opinion to have. And I also think it's really important that people do hold those views, so those important discussions can actually happen. Because if we all just agreed with each other, there'd be no challenge, there'd be no open discussions, and nobody'd really be getting any better. So it's kind of powerful that we've got both of those ideas going on. And I think for me, I'd like to see a little bit more of that being brought in, particularly in physics, but just in teaching in general. It's certainly a lovely way to go to develop the discussion and the ideas even further. Yeah. So next up, I would like to ask, what do you hope to portray by the metro stop of the key events? I think that was in the sort of the history narrative stuff. So what are you hoping to get across there?
I enjoyed that afternoon making that. So where do I want to start with that? I was lucky enough to have some training with Christine Council. I can't even remember if it was part. I think it was in that sequence. Christine Council, who's the really influential history specialist, who's had a big influence on the Ofsted framework. And anyway, I've had some really good training from her, and she was very interested so that children can understand somewhere that you need a globe in every classroom, and you need a timeline in every classroom. So when you're doing, when electricity was invented, you go and stand by the timeline, or when was Newton? Let's just because otherwise they think it was all in Victorian times, or who knows when they think it was. When was the atom discovered? Before or after Galileo? I don't know. So I felt it was really important, but it started off as like 5 different timelines because I had 5 big ideas, and then some people lapped over 2, some and then it all joined together, and electricity and particles joined together, so it felt more like a tube map. And so really, I would, as a science teacher, would have a globe in my room, and I would have a timeline, and I would just go and stand by it, and I'd maybe stick a picture of Rutherford or whatever by the relevant point. Was J.J. Thompson before or after? Well, it's important, right? Actually, to have that sequence right, the chronology right in your head. So I wanted the teachers to have that sense of when these things were. And if you're a non-specialist, you don't know. I don't know. Yeah. Do I know? I know when Darwin was. All these characters, I can barely name enough of them from biology, but there is a sequence, and I don't believe in teaching kids necessarily in chronological order, because I'm not really sure what's the point of teaching the geocentric model, other than you teach the geocentric model to know that you almost need to know it's wrong before you start teaching it. So, and I don't think we need to learn in the way that science evolved, but I do think it's really useful to say, what did they think before this? And increasingly, actually, I'm also think with one of the things that I regret not putting in the book was more diversity, and talking about the Indian contributions to astronomy and optics, and the Arabic contributions. So actually, that sort of globe stuff and putting those on the timeline, I think it's really powerful and really important. And
definitely, and so overlooked, particularly with with people lacking specialist knowledge, so overlooked to the point where really doing a disservice to the actual development of science, because you're not bringing up those key points that happened. And like you, I'd agree. I wouldn't probably step in and teach somebody an earlier model that we now know is incorrect first, because I think it can have a real impact on being what the student remembers, because it's their sort of their first example, it's their first model of possibly a new idea. So that can really have an impact, maybe drive the wrong ideas. So I totally agree. I don't think it does need to be in order necessarily, but understanding that there is a sequence to development, and understanding how different people contributed, which we talk about people who contributed to the periodic table an awful lot, but what about the people who contributed to everything else? We're pretty much stuck still on those few key people that were involved, and actually we really need to peel it back and look at what was going on. What did we understand at the time? Why did we understand that? Who was involved? And why was it perhaps this area of the world that was making so much progress in that as well? It can be really fascinating sometimes to actually look at why that is. And I didn't even intend to ask this, but have you ever thought about sort of tying together the timelines from science with any other subjects? Because I can think of, history and language straight away, really knitting together really well with the science curriculum. Is that something you've ever thought about?
I have no, but only briefly. I did originally have along the bottom things like when Shakespeare, things that I knew that the kids would have a framework of. When was Henry VIII? When was Queen Victoria? That sort of stuff. When was the Empire? Stuff that I knew that they would have studied at history and continue to study. When, there's a lot going on. World War One before or after relativity? Well, and Cubism and some of the modern composers and all of that turmoil at that time and physics being part of that. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. The challenge is, of course, that curriculum time is super tight.
Yeah.
How much time to give to the sort of history and the stories of it, and is it efficient? I mean, I talk a lot now about teaching the important stuff efficiently, because there's not much time, and especially after COVID, we've missed so much time. Can you justify talking about this stuff? I mean, I think you probably can, but I haven't really got any evidence to say kids who have a solid understanding of the chronology of ideas will be better able to solve problems on electric circuits.
That's
not much
exactly
evidence
it.
to support that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It would certainly develop people personally, and we're always talking about like a cultural capital insight and so in the subjects and things, aren't we? But it's whether or not it's actually driving us towards the goals that at the end of the day we're going to be measured in and the students are going to go away with. So are we driving to the right goals? Or actually, are we doing a disservice not to do that? So it's, a really interesting conversation to have. And I absolutely love talking to teachers from other subjects, love talking to a geography teacher at school and thinking about how our ideas, in some ways, actually conflict with each other, weirdly enough. And it's not something I expected. So tying in, I think it's such a great way to use time if you have it, almost. So if you've got that time, definitely go into the history, definitely go into subject links. But without having the time, it's, it just feels precious, doesn't it? It feels precious, and we just want to make the students the best scientists that they can be. But
I also find that scientists tend to be interested in this sort of stuff as well. I feel it's not a coincidence. So I think there is I think without some human element to it, a certain number of kids are just like, why are we doing this? And they've got a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, anyway, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And, some kids will really, really buy into history. I think it's one of the most popular subjects that I've seen in recent years, history being really, really popular. And I can't help but think, well, could we harness that? Could we use what they're doing in history to actually harness the kids a little bit more into our subject where we are sort of falling short? Because we tend to get our triple scientists, which are mostly quite keen, and then our combined scientists. There are definitely some who've got a real drive and just don't want that extra science, but there's an awful lot of students who really can't see the point, who really do think that this almost feels like a foreign language. So yeah, I'd completely agree there, definitely. And actually that brings us on nicely to one of the statements you make in your book about the questions that we ask. Now, this is following a moments question example, and you ask after that, what is it that we are actually trying to do when we pose a physics question to our students? Are we actually trying to get them to figure out the answer? Is that what we want? Or are we just trying to get the students to learn problem solving via these examples? And I just think that was such a clever way to go about things because, as I've mentioned before, with year 13, year 12 in particular, but others as well, I am constantly asked, Miss, is this the right answer? And I will glance at their process, and my response is usually, well, the process is fine, so the answer's probably right. But they still really want to know if the answer's right. And I'm like, well, it actually doesn't matter. We don't need to know this value. It bears absolutely, there's no weight to this whatsoever. I just want you to do the problem solving, and I want you to do the process. If the process is correct, the answer will be correct. Ignoring calculator errors and so on and so forth. So what made you decide to put things like this into your book?
That sort of question about what are we doing it for?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that comes from cognitive load. While you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, but don't we all get a real, isn't there some sort of adrenaline spike when you've got the answer right? Isn't it
So true.
addictive?
So
I mean,
true.
isn't this why we love solving problems? And whether it's, you know, on Saturday you're flicking through the crossword or whatever, there is there is the joy of, that is the joy of physics, isn't it? Problem solving and thinking,
Absolutely.
yeah, oh, I got that right. I know I got, and in fact, quite often you know you've got it right, even without looking in the back of the book. You just know that's the right answer, don't you?
Yeah.
So, but I think you don't get to that. This has come out of that research, and I've been thinking. I about a year ago, my lockdown thing was to learn to play chess better.
Oh wow.
And I'm hooked on that at the moment, and then that feels very much the same. You're sort of thinking it through like a multi-stage problem, but it's all
Yeah.
recognition. I'm
Yeah.
convinced of this. It's all memory and recognition. You're thinking, oh, hang on, that's like that other problem I've solved where you do that. I don't, you know, someone must have been the first, but
Yeah.
I mean, I doubt I've thought of anything original. I think I've probably applied. I mean, it's like the alphabet, isn't it? I haven't invented a new letter. I've just or a new word. I've just arranged them differently to other people. So you know,
Yeah.
or that's what to me the problem solving is. You're piecing together somewhere in your subconscious. Well, great book if you haven't read it. I'm not Eugenie or anyone. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. That changed me. It's not a physics book at all. It's a psychology book, but
Oh,
or an economics
fabulous.
book. But amazing. But I don't know why did that come up. But that whole idea of your sort of subconscious coming it's a massively. I mean, it's searching through all these different. You know, when you wake up at 3 a.m, go, I
Oh
know that
yeah.
answer.
Yeah.
And it's all that subconscious stuff going on, recognizing what. And so I don't care if it's 3 or 7, the answer. What it is really exciting and really interesting to think: have you drawn on the correct? Well, not even the correct. You know, have you found a new solution to this answer that
Yeah.
no one's ever thought of? I mean, how exciting is that?
Yeah. Well,
And
they talk a lot about humans being so obsessed with patterns, and realistically, a pattern of thought is recognition. They are, they're
yeah,
entirely linked. So
yeah.
yeah, and I've just seen that Helen's just posted, yes, excellent book. So there's definitely some fans watching today with that book. So I'm definitely going to have to take that one down later. It's not very often that I do one of these and people say, oh, you should read this book, and I don't look over there and think, I've got that one. But yeah, you found one today, so well
Okay,
done.
good,
That's
good, good,
another
good.
one to.
Top book.
Yeah. It's one I'll have to get added to my shelf, I think. Yeah, fantastic. The next question is about the thorium needle, which we mentioned already a bit. But yeah, so all I've written down here is teachers love a good story, but do students, in your opinion, remember the story rather than probably the required specification points? Now, I think we've spoken a little bit about this already, so we can keep this quite brief if you want. But basically, what's your opinion of bringing these discussions into lessons? Is it a distraction, or does it support?
Well, I mean, we haven't spoken about this, but this is a project I'm working on with a great colleague. You probably heard Richard Brock, King's College, really lovely guy, and I don't know how long he'd read my book. And if you haven't seen, I meant to grab a handful of them and wave them around. His IOP, Institute of Physics and Stories in Physics. What's it called? Something like that.
Yeah,
I'm assuming everyone's read. I'm talking to you, Jinny, but also anyone. If you don't know that, they're brilliant. Anyway, IOP asked me and him to give a little talk. They asked him to give a little talk, and I was the warm-up act. And so I have real reservations about stories, or at least real concerns in that it's that what's the phrase? The seductive. It's a great phrase, isn't it? The seductive details of a multimedia presentation. And we've looked into this together, Richard and I, about has anyone researched this? We know that they've researched if you have a PowerPoint slide with flashbang and all that sort of stuff. Everyone remembers it, really memorable, but they don't remember what it was about. You remember the exciting bit with the arrow in the eye and the the explosion or whatever. So we're doing a bit of research. We've got some funding. I'm not going to say I'm disappointed before we even start. I was hoping we would be able to test it in some sort of large scale test where we gave some kids the story and then built the science on it, and some kids we did something else that we thought might work, like retrieval practice, and then built the science on it, and then see what the outcomes were. And we're starting smaller than that. I think we've set ourselves a career-long part. I mean, who knows, but a career-long partnership in this, sort of teasing this answer out, because I think there's a risk that you remember the apple falling on the Newton's head and not having the idea that the apple and the earth are attracting each other.
Yes.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so the short answer is I don't know, but I'd really like to know. I
But
think
you're
there is a
trying to
risk.
find out, yeah.
Yeah. And the Institute of Physics is funding that, so really
Wow.
grateful to them. Charles Tracy, who's the sort of education person on
Yeah.
that, has been brilliant.
Amazing. That's really interesting to know that
Did
development's happening.
you know that was coming? I think that was. Have I written about that or something, or was it just you just
No,
hit the spot?
I had no idea
Okay,
actually.
fine.
But
Good to hear.
obviously, I'm familiar with the IOP's. I think it is Stories in Physics,
Yeah.
words to that effect. And yeah, they've given me some real good. I think it's nice to have a sort of anecdotes sometimes, which you can do if you have experience in something. Now, my experience of science is quite random, probably not what you'd expect for a physics teacher, but certainly I can sit there and talk about, for example, things from medical physics. It's the kind of area that I've done a little bit of work in before, in genetics as well, weirdly enough. And when I read those stories by the IOP, what I'm able to do is kind of gather those anecdotes and deliver as though I feel more experienced than I really am in that area. So it's always good to have the opportunity to have links to those resources. So it's great that you mentioned that as well.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, so the next part that I would like to ask you about is there's a bit in the book where, in fact, you do this almost throughout, which I have seen before, but I don't do enough of yet. And it's when you kind of like chart comparisons as similarities and differences, and you make a really clear organization of that knowledge. I think it really links in well with knowledge organizers in some ways, because it brings up the key points that the kids need to know. It shows them a visualization of how to organize that information. So it's supporting the development of the schema as well. But how do you decide when it's a good time to organize information like that? And how would you probably sort of go about delivering that with a class?
That particular knowledge organizer I find really, really useful. I pinched it from, of course, Ollie Cav,
Okay.
who's, again, read everything you can by him. He's been hugely influential on me.
Yeah.
But I think I pinched that from, the learning scientist. He illustrates everything. He illustrated the learning scientist stuff, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And one of them was this sort of, I can't remember which one's that called, elaboration. Anyway, that's where I got that one from. So I don't think you elaborate until you've got both ideas really clear. Or if it's so I've done it with a model of circuits and real circuits, and I think that's what the rope model that I use a lot, and then a real circuit. What's similar about them? What's different about them? And you fill that in. You could teachers say, why don't you just use a Venn? But Venns are messy. Anyway, this works really neatly. So I think they need to properly understand. The same with, I think this is true for most things. Anything you're going to do that's beyond the beginning, really atomized, sort of rose and shine, teach it in small chunks. Teach it in a small chunk, practice, before you try and do anything clever with it, like link it to something else, or to compare it to something else, or to solve a problem with it. Or this is my issue with inquiry learning. I just think until you've got all your bits, don't start trying to bring in other things. It's just too hard. Always practice until you've overlearned it, and then tie it properly into that rich schema that you've already got. And that's where it's powerful, I think.
Definitely, yeah. When you use these charts with classes, do they sort of know what to expect? Is it a case that you'll sort of say, oh, okay, we're going to use one of these again, and they're like, oh, yeah, we're familiar with that? So or is it just something that's incidental to your use?
No, and in fact, whenever I work across 6 different schools now, and whenever I walk into a room, quite often there's one on the board, and the kids go, they know what to do. I always, for those, anyway, you have. I'm hoping everyone can visualize what they look like. If I always have a slide, the next slide on with a filled-in one, because actually if you haven't worked it out beforehand, you'll get in the room. I can't solve them live.
No, so true.
and manage behaviour, and someone's dropped their pencil, and all that stuff. But that once you've done it, I usually do an I do, we do, you do. That works. Does everyone know what that is? I assume they do. So you model it and you think out loud, and then you do it in pairs, and then they're on their own. You don't have to do that very often with any of this stuff. It's all routine. What you don't want is the task. I don't care if I don't need them to learn how to fill in one of those tasks, other than it helps them learn some real stuff later on. So doing it infrequently is no use. It's got what they do with it has to be the routine, so they don't have to think about that, so they can think about the new stuff. So any of those graphic organizers or knowledge organizers, you want to use them so regularly that kids go, okay, it's one of them. I know what to do with that.
Definitely. How would you bring this in on a department level? I feel like I'm asking for personal advice now, but I'm not going to apologise for that, because I think a lot of people would probably have a similar question. It's something that I might go away and use, but then surely it's more powerful if it's more of a department-wide sort of habit or strategy. So what do you think about bringing it in as a department use?
I would probably want to make sure for that particular one, it's particularly powerful if you already understand what a schema is, what long-term memory looks like, in that sort of bubbles with links model. Because what you want people to do is to say, okay, they've learned this fact. Now it's time to link it to all these other facts, and this is a really good way of doing that. So, and I'd probably get people to. Okay, so I am making this up as I go along. Although we have done this in my trust, obviously, it hasn't been a thought through strategy. It's just sort of thrown. But I provide some. We do them together. I give some answers. We work out a few on our own, and then people are off. So I think it's a case of showing people how they work, modelling it, getting people to have a go. They can do it in pairs. I think pairs they work particularly nicely for sharing information across a class. You can imagine a department meeting doing the same. So let's do a think, pair, share. Let's do your own ones, do one or two, then with the person next to you, and you're walking around looking over. Great assessment opportunity as well, checking for understanding. You're looking over shoulders with your pen and going, "Oh, Mary, I'm going to get you to answer that one." When we do it all together in 2 minutes, so Mary knows it's coming and she can. At least it's not going to be a nasty surprise for her. And then
absolutely.
You pick your 3 or 4 really good ones and go, I've seen 3 or 4 really good under the visualizer or whatever. But you could easily do that in a department meeting as well.
Absolutely, and I think it'd be really good as like a discussion point to tease out those similarities and differences, so you can actually talk about what a strong one looks like and why some of them aren't working quite so well. It's probably one of the most powerful things I think you can do in a department is, come to an agreement on what a good one looks like. Because if you can't agree as a department, then it's so hard to share that with your classes, because how do you know that there's not loads and loads of inconsistencies between you, which obviously could lead to problems along the way, particularly as you share classes and everything else. So totally agree with that.
I think actually thinking about it, we're quite happy with kids to say, oh no, that's wrong. You've got a misunderstanding there. Let's work on that. And the kids are meant to just, these 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds are meant to go, okay. Whereas your 40-year-old physics teacher, your 50-year-old or chemistry teacher, I'm turning this around now. Imagine a chemistry teacher was doing it to me, and I'd happily filled it in about a group 1, and they're going to go, actually, Ben, that's wrong. Really? I think we're quite awkward about correcting each other's misunderstandings, and that's probably not. We're expecting a 12-year-old to be able to do it, but not so much a 50-year-old. So I think probably that culture of error, use of Doug Lemov. Doug Lemov's the other person who's been a massive influence. If you haven't got his new book, that's really rich in all that cognitive science stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you haven't got a culture of error among your colleagues, I think you're going to end up with people teaching the wrong stuff.
Yeah, and it comes back down to delivery as well. If you don't have a culture of error between you, then how do you know you're supporting that in the classroom? And could we do it better? And could we talk about how to do this really, really well and develop it? So I completely agree there. One of the things I found really fascinating that you put in your book quite a lot, which I found really kind of it's not something I do enough of, but it is really useful, and it did make me step back and think, why don't I do more of this? And that's the refutation text that you use. So how do you go about identifying and implementing those? Because the first thing I thought was, this is a great idea. where am I going to get those from? I mean, I've used a lot of the best evidence science teaching stuff. They've been brilliant for examples like that, but surely you've drawn on more. So how would you go about that?
I mean, we're blessed really in science because, as you know, in the 80s and 90s there was a ton of research on these misconceptions. So what's that? Children's Ideas in Science. My bookshelf. If I keep looking over there, it's because my bookshelf's over there. Children's Ideas in Science by, I'm reading it, Driver, and I knew it was Rosalind Driver and a number of other colleagues, is a really good starting point. Institute of Physics, Spark Physics has got a page of a section of their website on these misconceptions. Best is really good. There's some American ones. Is it Mossart? I can't remember. They're
yes.
You're never gonna run out of these. What we do with it, I work more with primary colleagues at the moment. On every medium term plan, we put the common misconceptions likely from that. I mean, partly we do that for the teachers because no doubt if kids have those misconceptions, the adults do. So
yeah.
I can't think of any off of my head, but there's no shortage of research. It's really easy to find. If you type in electricity misconceptions, you'll get pages of them on the internet.
Yeah.
And then so I think highlighting them to teachers in the medium term plan is really useful. And I stole that idea from the refutation text from somewhere, and I've gone back since to try and find out what paper it was because I don't think I've credited it properly in the book. Anyway, there are papers and it has been written about, but I was unable to find it again. I think it's a nice little name, but a really useful activity.
Ah, lovely. I love that. We've so Helen's been talking a little bit on the comment section and has mentioned Ros Driver and John Leach. I don't know if they I think are they authors related to
the misconceptions. They did a lot of that research.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. And Gethin said the Driver book is a classic. So if anybody is watching and is unsure of another book that they might like to add to their list, that sounds like a good one. So we have been going now for almost 50 minutes, so we're going to have to bring it to a close soon. No, please don't apologise at all. So I was wondering if you'd like to tell everybody who's watching a little bit about if you were going to do the same book again, what else might you add in? I know you mentioned earlier about some of the sort of like lesser known scientists that have contributed. So maybe you've got some examples there. Is there anything you'd do differently about the book? Is there anything you'd add in? Is there anything you've learnt since that's actually going to be something that you'd add? And actually, while we do this, Ben's really kindly offered to do a book giveaway again today. So for anybody who's currently watching, if you are interested in winning one of Ben's fantastic, a copy of Ben's fantastic book, all I need you to do is pop into the comment section and give us your full name. I will do a live draw quite soon. And all I will need you to do once your name has been announced as the winner is to give us a direct message on Twitter to @chatphysics. I'll drop that handle into the comment section just in case you're struggling. So if anybody would like to win a copy of Ben's book today, please drop your name in the comment section and then we'll talk to you on Twitter about getting that sent to you. And in the meantime, Ben, if you'd like to talk to us about anything that you would possibly in the future add, take away, or that you've learned recently, that would be amazing.
Yeah, that's quite a lot. And well, actually, when I got it through the post, I just the first ever time I thought that took so long to write. It's so thin. Anyway, the version 2, which probably won't ever get written, but version 2, the thing I think that's really I feel there are lots of things in there that I would like to add. I think that thing about diversity. So it's really hard to get women into history of physics, and it's I think it's easy enough to get Arabic scholars in, and I didn't particularly. It's easy enough to get in Indian science from Middle Ages and so on. I didn't, so I would definitely put that in. But again, we're still talking mainly men. I think probably the thing the way we're tackling it where I work now is to highlight a modern astrophysicist who happens to be a woman or black or just. We always make sure the images on our slides are more diverse, and not that we go on about it, but just that sort of. I want every kid who goes through my my schooling and the curriculum to know that people like them do science. It's harder with sexuality. It's easy enough to have a picture of a black astronomer. It's hard to say, oh, and by the way, their sexuality is this, that, or the other, because then it suddenly starts. You have to start talking about it, and it's not just always there in the background. But anyway, I'm not suggesting for a minute we're perfect, but anyway, I definitely want to put some stuff on that, how you might address that in the book. Probably more on oracy. Dylan William, I'm going to name drop. When I sent him a copy of my book, because you do that sort of thing. Anyway, he read it and was kind, but he said what you ought to have done. Actually, it was before I'd finished, but he said what you ought to do is put more on how to use models to solve problems. So things like, okay, I've seen some year 3 teachers do this recently. What path does the moon take as the Earth's orbiting the sun? So you've got the moon. I haven't got enough hands now. But you've got the moon orbiting the Earth orbiting the sun. What path would that be? And you've got this kind of, that sort of problem solving and thinking and taking it a step further. I think is what we do really well. Anyway, I haven't got much of that in there. I would put in there. I've really enjoyed stuff on diagrams and gesture. Barbara Tversky, another good book on gesture and how we learn, and really interesting stuff about gesture and how our hands. You watch us. I'm doing it now. I can't stop. But whenever you're explaining, there's so much. We do a lot with our hands in physics teaching, and you don't have to be taught it. You'll do it. But getting kids to start doing it with their hands as well, I think is really powerful. They're landing on you. The other thing I'd definitely put in there is more on SEND. This is something I'm learning a lot about at the moment. My trust is opening a special school in September, and so we're spending a lot of time thinking about what is it that makes this challenging for a pupil with special needs, and that's been really fascinating. So there'll definitely be more on that as well.
Oh, that's really cool. That's really thoughtful, actually. And so I think you've just stumped me, actually, because it's something that I'm working on at the moment, because I've identified it as, admittedly, one of my weakest areas is supporting the students. How are you going about finding that information? Where are you drawing from for the SEND support?
There's a really good ASE group. Rob Butler, I got in contact with, who works with the ASE. Yeah, I'd get in touch with him. They do how often it is, monthly, sort of live. You sign up with Eventbrite, but anyone can join. And they normally get someone in who's a specialist. And there are people out there that are really expert in this area, and they'll give a talk, and you then rummage around in their papers, in their back catalogue if they've got a book. So that sort of stuff. That is a good starting point. It is quite hard to find subject specialists, I think, science specialists who are really interested in SEND. That's the route that we found most productive.
Oh, that's incredible. It's really nice to hear about the special school being built. Maybe that's something like in the future we can really draw upon and implement.
Well, I'm learning a lot. I'm not an expert by any means, but I'm finding it really interesting to learn.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day actually about it's almost like a curse of a physics teacher, because quite often we end up put into A-level groups and GCSE groups because we are taking the students who are focusing the most on physics, and it's not that we don't have any SEND kids in there. It's just that by that point it tends to be a little bit like they tend to be a bit more self-sufficient, whereas when they first come into the school, it's really new to us. We're having to put things in place initially rather than just kind of carrying them on. So somebody might come and talk to me about SEND in year 11 and just say, well, this is what we do, this works really well, and you just sort of go, okay, well, I'll do that then. But actually, when you work with the younger students and you are almost learning with them to some extent, or learning with their parents, or any TAs or Senkos you're working with, and you're trying to get in a support system that works, I feel like that's where you make the most progress, and that's where you really push forward your understanding of how to do that. And with having a little bit less experience in year 7 and 8 teaching, I just don't feel like I'm good enough yet. So it's really interesting that's come up in our conversation, definitely. But Now, so strangely enough, Ben, with the book giveaway, we've had several people comment to say they already have your book and they don't want to take the prize for somebody else. We've also had some DMs from other people saying that as part of the school, they've already got it. So our winner today is our individual who has not got a copy of the book. Beatrice, you are going to be winning a copy of the book because it seems like everybody else is kindly allowing you to be the only person at the moment who doesn't seem to have a copy or be working with it. So, Beatrice, if you could send us a DM at Chat Physics on Twitter, I'm popping that into the message for you, just so you make sure we've absolutely got the right one there. There we go. If you send us a DM, we'll get that arranged.
Beatrice has been promoting it. I'm assuming it's the same Beatrice who's been promoting it on Twitter, and has got an iced tea, and I can't remember what else we were going to do. Pancakes. If that's the same one, well done, and nice to meet you.
That's absolutely fantastic. That's absolutely brilliant. I'm so pleased. It's so nice to hear people just sort of sit there and go, it's okay, like we've got it, we've read it, we're using it as a department. Let somebody else have this joy. So thanks everyone. That was really kind. I know it's sometimes tempting to pop your name in anyway, because it's free, it's amazing. You can, show it off with friends. So that's really lovely. Yeah. David said iced tea, pancakes, and a new book. Beatrice, you will love it. That is absolutely fab. Cool. Excellent. Ben, it's been absolutely amazing having you today. And if we could get to work with you in the future again, I would absolutely not hesitate. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jinny. And it's been really good fun. I can't recommend enough talking about yourself for an hour. I love it. So thank you.
It's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah.
And thanks to everyone who's out there in the garden watching it. David and Gethin and Helen and Beatrice, and I'm sure one other person at least. Hopefully.
We've had quite a few people popping in and out. We are going to share this now on Twitter as well. So anybody who's not been able to watch it already, please share it with people. It's going to be available on our YouTube channel for the foreseeable, which is absolutely brilliant. So Ben, thank you once again. Everybody at home, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you next time when we have another author for our Q&A from Chat Physics. Thank you very much. Goodbye.